A moment. Mayor, hello. I know there's a lot of talking and engaging going on, but we'll have more of that, but we'd like to move forward here. So thank you, everyone. Again, welcome. My name is Mayor Mike Mattson of Davenport. Born and raised in Davenport. Born actually in Iowa City, raised in Davenport, served in the military, the Army for 20-some years. Came back to teach high school, and now I get to be the mayor. So I'm privileged to be here with you today. Privileged to be with all our guests, and certainly with the Global Leadership Coalition. So it's my honor to welcome you all for a critical and timely conversation about the global threats and opportunities facing our country today, and how America's role in the world matters more than ever to our local communities, especially us here in Des Moines, Davenport, Sioux City, Council Bluffs, Cedar Rapids, all of Iowa. I'm delighted to be here with a great group of folks, but especially Ambassador Quinn. Good talking with you. It was good talking with the ambassador, a leader in Indochina. I was telling him my son is in the Army, actually leaves for Laos tomorrow. So we had great conversations there. Congressman Feenstra, haven't met you, but thank you for your service. Good to see you. And my representative, Congresswoman Miller-Meeks, it's kind of neat we have the West and the East coming together today at this luncheon, so I get to stand in front of you and welcome you, and it's just my privilege. As you know, Ambassador Terry Branstad was looking forward to joining today's conversation, but kind of a busy guy, just like the respective people we just said, had to be pulled away for whatever travel he had to do. I just want to put a plug in. It's part of my remarks, and since he's not here, I'm just telling all of you, I am so happy. He was very gracious, and it was just a great opportunity. My wife and I and other folks from Davenport are part of a Sister Cities Coalition with the suburb of Beijing. So a few years ago, we were able to go to Beijing and to Langfang, and Ambassador Branstad was so gracious, he allowed us to come to the embassy and sat and talk with him. It's interesting to talk to a governor of your state as the ambassador in China, in Beijing, in the embassy, about relationships that we're all talking about now. And we were there with the Iowa Soybean Association talking about all the things in trade and how Iowa is, doing wonderful things in China. I just want to say on behalf of my family in Davenport how gracious it was that Ambassador Branstad took the time to do that. So that's not in my remarks. Sorry, folks that set me up. I just had to say that. I want to thank the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for bringing us together this afternoon. The USGL has assembled a powerful group of leaders from around the state to form the Iowa Advisory Committee, where we're Democrats, Republicans, independents, pillars of the business community, humanitarian faith communities, civic officials, military veterans, and we've all arrived at the same conclusion: America must continue to be the global leader around the world. Looking out at the crowd right now, I can see that everyone in this room understands how interconnected our security and our prosperity are with the rest of the world, and that America is still and will always be an indispensable leader in the world today. Nobody knows that better than the men and women that serve the country. So if you're a veteran in the room at this time, please stand so we can recognize you. There's no shortage of global threats and opportunities: Russia's invasion of Ukraine, food security crisis, famine, and some of the most unstable countries of the world, a historic number of displaced people, competition from China, and a global economic recovery from an ongoing pandemic that has led to mass disruption of the global supply chains, to name just a few. As the country starts to look to us here in Iowa, ahead of the upcoming elections, where we all have the unique opportunity to hear personally from our many presidential candidates on their vision for America's role in the world and how ways a country can meet this moment of rising global crisis. The stakes have truly never been higher for America's global leadership. So we're here today because we know that pulling back, especially now, is simply not in our best interest. It's important to remember that no matter your background, belief in America's global leadership is something we all have in common. With this diverse group of men and women across Iowa, we've come together for this conversation. With that, is my distinct privilege and honor to tell us a lot more about what the USGLC, work here in Iowa especially, but throughout the world. Michelle Beckering, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you back to Iowa and to here in Des Moines and to get to know you. So thank you. Let's all give her a wonderful, warm Iowa welcome.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mayor Mattson, for that warm individual welcome, and thank you all for joining us. But before I start, please let me invite you to eat. The meal is in front of you. Everyone is being so polite, so please do help yourself and enjoy while we have our program. Now, it is a special privilege for me to be here, and the USGLC team right now is very nervous because any chance I have to talk about Iowa, which is my home state, can go a little off the rails for them, but I promised I would keep this, very tied down. So while the mayor represented the east part of Iowa, I'm a proud born and raised Northwest Iowan, so Congressman Feenstra. Now, it is rare that I have the privilege of being on a panel with someone who actually went to my high school and college. So go Defenders and go Wolfpack. So I had to get that in. But I'm here today on behalf of USGLC, and it gives me great pride to be here, to be with this distinguished group of members, of panelists, and specifically with you and Iowans. And I think you will agree when you look at who's in this room that we are so lucky to be led by such not only a great delegation in Congress, but here in the state as well. And thanks to our advisory council members. As Mayor Mattson said, we are a bipartisan organization. And we are really proud that we are chaired here in Iowa by Ambassador Branstad and Senator Tom Harkin. At USGLC, we are really proud of the diverse network that we bring together. We bring together over 500 businesses, humanitarian organizations, military veterans, faith-based leaders, and foreign policy luminaries from all 50 states. What brings this diverse coalition together is our belief in the importance of civilian tools of diplomacy and development. We represent a rich spectrum of background and experiences, from a year-long training program called the Next Gen program to our Farmers for Prosperity initiative, which we have recently launched. Our network spans coast to coast and throughout the country, from Maine to Arizona, Texas to Michigan, and of course, right here in Iowa. Our bipartisan National Advisory Council is made up of our nation's smartest and leading voices in national security and foreign policy. This includes former secretaries of state, of defense, members of Congress, and of course, national security advisors. But as mentioned earlier, we are particularly proud of the voices of our military community who understand, perhaps better than most, the critical role that international development and diplomacy play as a tool in our national security toolkit. USGLC's National Security Advisory Council, which is co-chaired by Admiral Stavridis and General Zinni, is comprised of over 250 retired generals and flag officers. We are especially proud to have many of our veterans for Smart Power here in our room today. This initiative is comprised of over 30,000 veterans from across the country. And what again brings this diverse community together is our shared belief in the importance of America's global leadership. We believe that efficient and effective investments in diplomacy and development are essential for three things. First, to protect our national security. Second, to advance our economic interests. And third, because it projects the very best of American values. It's why we often talk about a tiny 1% of the federal budget, which is called the International Affairs budget. And we have the data to prove that this is one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments America makes. It's also why we have been asking our community over the past couple years, Foreign assistance, foreign aid, foreign investment, what's this worth? What's it worth abroad and what's it worth here at home? Because it's worth quite a lot. It's feeding the world. It's tackling food crises and global malnutrition. It's standing with our allies to stand up against authoritarians like Russia who have invaded Ukraine. And it's leading global health investments to fight disease and to end pandemics. But it also, and maybe most importantly for our discussion today, it sure means a lot here at home. I think of the return on the investment we have in a state like Iowa, where $15.8 billion of goods were exported last year. And to think of the role the IAB plays in that. Right now, for every $1 in international programs USTDA invests overseas, it generates $117 in exports back here at home. We also know that for every $1 we spend in conflict prevention, we are saving $16 in military response costs. And maybe more importantly than that cost savings is frankly the savings of human life when we don't have to send our men and women into harm's way. So I think you'll agree it's worth quite a lot. And now it is my privilege to welcome to the stage Patricia Grote, Executive Director of the Iowa International Center, a member of the USGLC Coalition, because I'd like you to hear directly from her what it's worth for her to join us today. Patricia, will you join me?
Thank you for that warm introduction and for including me here today. I'm Patricia Grote. I am the Executive Director of the Iowa International Center. Iowa International Center connects Iowans with people from around the world to create a warm, welcoming, and prosperous community. We do this by removing language barriers, reducing biases by celebrating cultural understanding, and offering international exchanges for emerging leaders from across the world. In fact, beginning tomorrow, we'll be welcoming a delegation of Ukrainian healthcare leaders for a week here in Des Moines. They'll be visiting with leading healthcare professionals of different sorts. So we are excited to be hosting that group of individuals. As a proud member of USGLC's Iowa Advisory Committee, and as someone who believes that promoting global development is central to demonstrating American values and advancing our interests around the world, it's an honor to be with you here today. Today, the United States is providing foreign assistance in new and more effective ways than ever before, and American organizations are working tirelessly to make the world a better and safer place. Strategic investments in important programs are critical to tackling global challenges like poverty, hunger, and disease. When organizations partner with government agencies and U.S. businesses, incredible things happen. As many of us in this room already know, large and small businesses here in Des Moines and around Iowa understand that local economies rise and fall with the economic currents of the world. Most people who buy American goods and services do not live in America. Many of them live in the developing world, where markets are growing the fastest. In fact, 11 of America's top 15 trading partners were once recipients of foreign aid. 1 in 5 American jobs are tied to international trade, and 1/3 of all manufacturing jobs in the U.S. are directly tied to our exports. There are some common themes here, aren't there? That is why we rely on critical strategic investments in diplomacy and development to help fight corruption, promote rule of law, and open new markets for our goods and services, which is key to our economic prosperity here at home. So whether you joined us today from the business community, the military community, the humanitarian community, or the academic community, I know these are all beliefs that we have in common. Now, it's really my honor to get to introduce a great panel of speakers today. First, let me introduce Ambassador Kenneth Quinn, President Emeritus of the World Food Prize Foundation. Ambassador Quinn has had a long and storied career in public service. He has served as the president of the World Food Prize Foundation from 2000 until 2020, following a 32-year career in foreign service, including as U.S. Ambassador to Cambodia and as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, where he was responsible for coordinating America's policy and engagement in the Asia-Pacific region. From the beginning of his career as a rural development officer in Vietnam, supporting farmers to develop more sustainable agricultural methods, to his recent two-decade leadership at the World Food Prize Foundation, Ambassador Quinn is a fierce advocate for Iowa's role in strengthening our nation's national security and economy. He knows firsthand why we must invest in all our tools of national power, development, diplomacy, and defense to keep America safe, secure, and prosperous. We're also excited to be joined by Congressman Randy Feenstra, a dedicated public servant who represents Iowa's 4th District. He began his career in local politics as the treasurer of Sioux County before serving in the Iowa State Senate from 2009 until 2021. In his second term in the House, Congressman Feenstra serves on the Agriculture Committee as well as the Ways and Means Committee, where he is a strong advocate of expanding export opportunities for Iowa's farmers and producers. We are also honored to be joined by Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks, a 24-year military veteran who represents Iowa's 1st District. Joining the military when she was 18, Congresswoman Miller-Meeks retired at the rank of lieutenant colonel and later became the first female president of the Iowa Medical Society. She was appointed by then-Governor Branstad to serve as the director of the Iowa Department of Public Health. The Congresswoman then served in the Iowa State Senate alongside Congressman Feenstra until 2021, when she was elected to Congress. Today, the Congresswoman sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, and is the first vice chair of the Conservative Climate Caucus. We are also excited to welcome Sydney Pokorny, the facility manager at Cargill's Fort Dodge Starches and Sweeteners plant. Sydney has been with Cargill for more than 15 years and has experience in engineering as well as wastewater, ethanol production, and natural resources. We'll also be welcoming USGLC's Michelle Beckering back to the stage to moderate today's conversation. We are grateful to all of you for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing the panel's thoughts on how we can strengthen America's global leadership. Thank you.
Okay, well, we are excited to kick off our conversation. And as I'm looking out the window, I do feel I need to say thank you all for braving the elements, which I know in Iowa this would not be considered elements. But let me tell you, this would shut down Washington, D.C. for a week.
Oh, yeah.
A full week. We were a little bit worried about turnout today, and then we said, oh, this is Iowa. It's fine. I'm going to start, unfortunately, with kind of a heady topic, but I do feel like it's a topic that kind of makes sense. I mean, if you think about Iowa and it being a leading agricultural producer and exporter, you know, I think something we haven't often felt and thought about here at home in our state is food insecurity. But when I look across the world today, and all of you know this, when we see sort of the rise in global crises, right now, one of the ones that we are most concerned about is that of the rising global food crisis. Right now, across history, they have, the data shows that we are in the worst food crisis in history. Right now, 828 million people go to bed hungry every night. And as a parent of a small child, the statistic that really hit me is nearly 50% of all childhood deaths around the world are directly because of either hunger or, of course, a related symptom of hunger, 50%. So when we look at that, we also recognize while there is this dearth, we also see we have a huge increase in the price of food. Since 2021, food prices internationally have gone up 14%. And this isn't just affecting people overseas, it's affecting people in our communities here at home as well. And so I do want to thank everyone on this panel who came here today specifically for your own contribution to helping address and end this crisis. Ambassador Quinn, I want to start with you and that aptly named World Food Prize, and we're here in your beautiful hall today. You know, I was just really touched by hearing, Patricia give your overview and just thinking of how much of your career you have dedicated overseas to really helping feed the hungry, to ending poverty, to ending conflict. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that rich history, because you also have history here in the United States through Iowa Shares, which I understand is a humanitarian organization that in the 70s was working really closely to bring supplies, Iowa's doctors and nurses, to Cambodia to help with refugees. So can you talk to us a little bit about that rich experience and how that led to your role here at the World Food Prize and what the priorities are for the organization?
Sure, Michelle, thank you. I asked Zane to stand in the back of the room, and when I'm talking too much, this is my one, sort of give me the hook on that. But I just want to say I'm here for two reasons. One, my great, enormous respect for USGLC and Liz Schreier. And second, for my equally great and enormous respect for Governor Branstad. Yeah. And he asked me to apologize. I guess probably most of you didn't get the word that I'd be here. There would be even bigger fall off of people coming. Yeah. But he and I go back to when he was lieutenant governor, and he was 32 years old, and we went out to the Manson and Algona tornadoes. And I was on Governor Ray's staff, and Governor Ray was in Romania on that. So, and I am just so thrilled that he's the new president of the World Food Prize and is going to continue lifting it up with the inspiration of Norman Borlaug and John Ruan. So, thank you. So I was listening to the wonderful introduction, Pat, thank you, and saying, should I come up now and tell everybody the truth? Which is, first of all, I was born in the Bronx, not in Iowa.
Oh.
Yeah. I grew up in Dubuque. I was a city kid. Ooh. I don't think I knew what FFA was, much less be in it. And when I passed the Foreign Service exam, 20,000 people take it. They only hire 200. How did a kid from Dubuque, from Loris, so I said, it's the Dordt College of Eastern Iowa, get in? And I said, government makes mistakes. They got my scores mixed up with some guy from Princeton or Harvard or so. But I get in, and I show up at the State Department to take the oath, and these visions of Paris, London, Vienna, if I have to, Stockholm. And instead, they send me to Vietnam in the middle of the war, trained me for 10 months in Vietnamese, and not in the embassy, not in a consulate, not in a provincial capital, but working in rice-growing villages as the new miracle rice that was patterned on Norman Borlaug's miracle wheat was being introduced. And I learned the lesson of my life, and I learned the lesson of what made Iowa great, because I had 8 villages, and we had fixed a road, a rural farm-to-market road, through 4 of them. And wherever we fixed the road, farmers used the new seeds, and everything changed, including the Viet Cong that we couldn't get rid of with bombs and rockets and boots on the ground evaporated in face of the prosperity. And in the 4 where we hadn't fixed the road, nothing changed. Child mortality remained high. Malnutrition remained high. And the lesson I learned was, and I told the UN in 2013 when I addressed them, and everywhere I go, is where the road ends is where malnutrition, poverty and hunger, and conflict, insurgency, and terrorism all begin. Secretary of Defense Bob Gates, when I told him and Condoleezza Rice this story, he interrupted me and he said, every one of my commanders in Afghanistan says the same thing. Where the road ends, the insurgency begins. And so I have spent they gave me a chance to go to Harvard, and I turned them down to stay in Vietnam. And usually when there's such a clear sign of mental instability, they bring you home right away. But they needed people to stay in Vietnam, and so I stayed there. I got, plucked off the Cambodian border to work on Henry Kissinger's staff at the Nixon White House. Got to see Nixon resign in the East Room, and Jerry Ford, who I enormous admiration for President Ford, and to see this pageantry of security, food, and issues and how they relate. And I want to make the World Food Prize bring together national security and global food security. So in 9/11, in 2001, I had put and brought 7 experts in bioterrorism and agroterrorism to the World Food Prize in Des Moines before 9/11. And then they came and spoke in October. I invited them and they said, the head of the FDA said, the issues discussed in Des Moines helped keep America safe in the immediate months after 9/11. And then I brought Israeli and Palestinian water engineers and specialists to Des Moines to talk about water sharing. And with Secretary Vilsack, brought the ministers of Afghanistan and Pakistan to Des Moines, to the World Food Prize. In 2012, our laureate, World Food Prize laureate, winner of our $250,000 prize, was Daniel Hillel, Israeli pioneer in drip irrigation. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon flew to Des Moines just to join in presenting him our award at the state capitol in the House chamber. We're so privileged. And in the audience, and he was nominated, this Israeli Jewish irrigation specialist, by 3 Muslim and Arab scientists. And in the audience is an Israeli diplomat. On one side of him is Princess Haya bint al-Hussein, the daughter of King Hussein, and on the other is a sheikh from Qatar. And everyone is cheering this peace through agriculture, that Iowa's great contribution, great legacy of all our great heroes of bringing people together was this treasure for our state, for our country, and that. And the Israeli diplomat said to me, maybe we should do all the Middle East negotiations in Iowa. And with Governor Branstad, we brought Xi Jinping, as vice president into this building. Here, in this exact same spot, they signed contracts for $3.5 billion of soybean exports to China. And so Iowa, the legacy of Norman Borlaug, the World Food Prize, this building, this place, this legacy is so critically important. So Zane's not giving me the hook, but I'm giving my own hook. So on that. But thank you.
No, and Ambassador Quinn, I think you're raising such an interesting point, and it really leads me into my next question to you, Congressman Feenstra, and this idea of the power of food and peace through agriculture. And Iowan farmers really being at the forefront of solving this world crisis. Your district, District 4, is actually the country's 2nd largest producer of agricultural products across the entire country. And not surprisingly then, you sit on the House Agriculture Committee, as a good representative of that district would do. So talk to us a little bit about that and how on the committee, how do you see usage of America's civilian tools like diplomacy, like development, like international food assistance, to not only support those overseas, but honestly to support the farmers in your district and to help open those overseas markets, for their products.
Yeah. Well, as we all know, we're the breadbasket to the world. We are Iowa. All our products go from Taiwan to China to the Pacific Rim to Europe, and it's all the local farmers. Yeah. And they make it happen, and that's why it's so concerning when certain issues come up, when we have a drought, how that impacts society around the world. What's happening in Ukraine, how that impacts. So there's just so many concerns, and we see this now with eggs, not only here in our country, but around the world, that we're buying eggs at $8 a dozen, and all because of what happened, avian bird flu. And so there's always fears of the African swine fever hitting the hogs. And this is what our producers every day are thinking about, and how it affects this global area. And I sit on Ways and Means also, that we deal with trade. So we talk about trade. I was in Mexico City 2 weeks ago talking about USMCA and the GMO issue, right? I mean, you don't think about, we naturally think GMO is fine, but there's other countries that say, well, wait a minute. So there's always the effect. And if they don't buy, 25% of our export goes to Mexico on corn. If they don't buy our corn, that's going to hurt their people also, directly affect them. So there's so much that we do that affects the world. And it's just such an honor and privilege to be here, Michelle, with you and to talk about how important it is.
Well, I think you've just underscored that diplomacy part, right? Because sometimes I think we can be very, myopic and think, okay, well, we're producing all this food, the world needs it. The Mexico GMO issue is a great example where, we've got this product, they need it, but there's a lot of diplomacy and trade negotiation that goes into that. And so we thank you for your work there. Congresswoman Miller-Meeks, I want to go back to this idea of food insecurity being global insecurity. And I was thinking of what Ambassador Quinn mentioned when he said, where the road ends, conflict starts. And I thought that is so poignant and so illustrative, really, of this idea. And, again, I want to thank you for your service in the Army, and you have seen so much of this firsthand. We know that hunger is one of the leading causes of global conflict, and in fact, 60% of the world's food insecure, probably not surprisingly, live in conflict areas. Last year, you and Congressman Feenstra both supported the Global Food Security Reauthorization Act, and that legislation is really hailed as being critical in these efforts around the world. So I want to ask you from your experience, obviously your strong military experience, but now as a congresswoman, how is America's global leadership in strengthening food security, what is that direct nexus to help reduce conflict and to build up our own national security here at home?
I'm going to dovetail actually several different things in my experience over the past week. And so with Representative Feenstra, we were in Mexico City, and it was a very important meeting. And we were there for border issues, for fentanyl, but it's also important for us to be engaged with other countries, with other members of governments for the diplomacy thing. You talked a little bit about the pandemic, so if I can reflect back, coming through the pandemic, the World Health Organization has said that worldwide childhood poverty has increased over 15% and will take decades to regain where we were prior to the pandemic. Most people acknowledge what's going on and reflect on what's going on in Ukraine with Russia, an unprovoked, unprecedented attack on Ukraine, how that affects the world food supply. But we've forgotten about what happened in Sri Lanka. And I mention this because I was speaking at a global energy forum, and so it may surprise people in this room to know that for 2 years, as I've gone to COP26, COP27, and then spoke recently at a global energy forum, I've told Texas and Louisiana, Iowa's an energy state. So we're not just an agricultural state, we're an energy state. And so reflecting upon what you said, where the road ends. And so as we're meeting, I'm talking about what we do, with agriculture, how that has a role in energy, but it seems to me they're all tied together. So it's not just food insecurity, it's energy. When we were at COP27, we were in Egypt, we were meeting with other countries, talking about the requirements that the developed world is placing on them. And as I thought about that and reflected on that, and this may be a little bit controversial, but I've said it in public, and I've said it when I've gone to colleges, it seems to me unethical that developed nations would be telling developing nations that they cannot utilize or produce their own energy. Because not only is it necessary for them to produce food, I mean, when you think about it, to produce food,
Right.
What about clean water? What about sanitation, septic systems? That's all necessary. You have to have energy to develop those systems. What about treating infectious diseases in those communities? And even more importantly, when you think about the United States and our development, where we went from an agrarian society to an industrial to now an information society, that it was having access to energy and electricity that allowed us to work during the day, have lights on to study at night. So the human potential, the human capital that we are not allowing to be developed. And so in Iowa, I could not be more proud to be. I was not born in Iowa. I adopted Iowa, or Iowa adopted me, whichever you want to say. And I had traveled, in the military and with my dad, and then personally all around the world. Could not be more proud to live in a state. So not only are we helping with food insecurity and what Norm Borlaug did, when I grew up, people were going to die of lack of food and overpopulation. So what we have done, what's been done with genetically modified crops, what's being done at our institutions of higher education here with developing crops not only that can, that are drought resistant, that are disease resistant, but diseases that affect humans, i.e. malaria. And then you have international groups saying, well, we don't want those entities, although the help it would give to other countries is vastly important. And then lastly, I want to say, I'm a member of the policy committee, Chairman Representative Gary Palmer, and we were talking about what the Chinese Communist Party has done, so this gets to your national security, in what we used to do in the United States, and that is through either food or development, sending instruction, sending farmers to help other countries to be able to utilize their resources, what Harry Stein has done with biochar and what it can do for marginal soils, but also what China is doing now in helping with infrastructure. So it's that last road. So whether that's energy infrastructure, whether that's infrastructure on farming techniques that make sense to that country, and then infrastructure and roads or bridges. That is a form of diplomacy that has seemed to have lost favor, but it is desperately needed. And we have this isolationist, I think, front in the United States, both on the right and on the left. It is on both sides that I think we need to overcome, because it is a national security issue what happens in Mexico, Central America, South America, in this entire northern hemisphere.
Well, I'm so glad I'm sitting next to you. I just want to lead a chorus of amen.
You inspired me, Ambassador Quinn.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so important, too, that it isn't just, we can talk about food, but as any farmer will tell you, how does food get produced, right? It's all those things. It's the clean water, it's the energy. And I was really struck by something one of the beneficiaries of a program I worked in years ago said to me, and he was from sub-Saharan Africa, and he said, Michelle, you just don't understand. Hungry people and hungry parents of hungry children will do anything to take care of their families. And I just think, we think of that desperation in this conflict, and I think you have rightly outlined just how much goes into that, because it is so multi-sectoral. I want to turn to you, Sydney. We have talked a lot about sort of this international, if you will, sort of NGO response, and then the public sector response. But, one of the things that we have increasingly, I think, done a really good job about is talking in the United States about is the role of our private sector. And there was a statistic that hit me a couple years ago. I was the assistant administrator at USAID. For those of you who know USAID, it's the world's largest bilateral donor of development humanitarian assistance. But what a lot of people don't realize is now, today in 2023, when you look at emerging capital flows into the developing world, right? When USAID started in 1963, it was 90% of funds that went into the developing world were from public sector sources, right? Largely the United States. Today, that is less than 10%. The other 90% comes from the private sector. To Congresswoman, to your remarks about really getting into a community and localizing the response, we have to do that through. The public sector can do the framework, it can allocate the funding, but we need Cargill. We need our private sector to really go in and do that work. And so I want to, first of all, thank you for the work that Cargill does as one of the America's largest corporations. And I was really struck that not only are you supporting our farmers and ranchers here in the United States so that they can produce and thrive in a global market, but increasingly through a lot of your innovative and sustainability programs, you're now working with farmers from Brazil, to Ukraine to help them increase their own outputs, right, so that they can lend to their own food security. So can you talk to us a little bit more about the role of the public sector, or excuse me, the private sector like Cargill in these efforts?
Sure. And I see I'm the only speaker who brought notes with me, so I'm
I have
not as
mine.
polished as the rest
I
of the
have
folks,
mine.
and I'm going to use them.
I have mine.
Oh, you do? Okay,
Yeah.
just kept it hidden.
So-
All right. So no, thank you. Appreciate the question. So Cargill's seat at the center of the supply chain gives us the unique opportunity to connect producers and farmers with customers and consumers as we work to make the world's food system more sustainable, resilient, and accessible to everyone. Cargill's mission and our purpose, the reason we exist, is to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. And we can't deliver on that commitment. And we can't improve food security around the world without farmers. So that's a core function of what we do as feeding, in our efforts to feed the world. So the future of agriculture and our global food system requires us to invest in farmers. If they don't succeed, none of us will. All of us depend on the harvests of our farmers and ranchers and food workers for the food that's on our tables right now and around the world. And it matters to our economy as well. 1 in 10 jobs in the United States is dependent on agriculture. And according to the Farm Bureau, 1 out of every 4 acres of U.S. farm production is exported, which I think you already alluded to that earlier. So farmers here in the heartland aren't just feeding us locally, they're feeding the world. And they play a critical role in protecting the stability of our food system, preventing food prices from rising even further, because they're protecting and growing a quality, reliable source of food here. Cargill's role is really to ensure that food moves where it's needed, from areas of abundance like we have here in Iowa and in the breadbasket states here, to areas of need, as several have already commented on. And we are helping the world's farmers sustainably meet the demands of a growing population. From harnessing innovation to help farmers increase yields and reduce costs, to providing tools and training to manage risk, to partnering on sustainable farming methods and connecting to new markets. I have a couple examples I can talk about. There's lots more. You talked about some around the world. So we have several examples because we try to meet the need where we are. So there's examples of helping small farmers, in what's it called, Hatching for Hope. I'm looking at Katie to confirm, where we're actually teaching farmers how to protect and grow chicken production facilities. It started in India 3 or 4 years ago and has expanded dramatically. It's mostly female farmers. In the US, we just recently launched our Regen Connect program, is what it's called, and it actually pays farmers to sequester carbon and improve soil health through adoption of regenerative farming practices. So Cargill will pay farmers to do this. It helps us because we have a commitment to reduce our carbon footprint across our entire supply chain. And it helps farmers because it reduces their costs for fertilizer, diesel, labor, and machine hours because they make fewer passes through the field, and it increases productivity and profitability with those practices. So those are just a couple examples of how Cargill partners with farmers to help increase and strengthen the food supply system around the world.
Well, I do want to applaud you for that because I think one of the things that has always really impressed us about Cargill too is when you have sort of those, top-led mandates about carbon, et cetera, is how you've really built that into your footprint. And it's not just something you're talking about, but you're working with farmers to figure out how to do that. And through your stories of India, I'm just thinking too of while that's increasing food supply, right? You're economically empowering women who are going on to invest in their communities. And we know that when women invest in their communities overseas, we actually see a 90% increase, right, in money and stability within a family. And so really applaud you for your efforts. So it is not often at this point in a conversation that we've gone 20 minutes and have not said China. Or at least is that just my world? I feel like...
I did
Party.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was a mention. And so I just feel like it behooves me, and especially, in a state where we are large soy exporters. So Ambassador Quinn, I want to talk with you. And again, maybe this is now the Washingtonian in me, but competition with China is the buzzword. But it means different things, right? And we have to be smart about it because it is still a country. We are exporting a lot of our agricultural products too. But I think we have also, as a nation, and largely, I know Congress has a lot of conversations about this, as we have seen to Congresswoman Miller-Meeks' remarks earlier, some saying, how much do we have to invest in the world? Can't other countries do this? We really can if we still want to be a player in the world stage, especially noting now that China has surpassed the United States as one of the largest exporters from a lot of the countries where we used to hold that top spot. So Ambassador Quinn, you've spent so much time in your career in Asia. Let me ask you about this. How can we honestly better leverage our strategic advantages here? Saying, we can't cut China out. But what are the options we have if it's either better relations with our Indo-Pacific partners, if it's through diplomacy, but how can we still, invest in our own interests?
Well, having spent a great deal of my professional career, 55 years, in either Southeast Asia or Asia, I first went to China in 1979, where I got to meet Deng Xiaoping, travel around the country. And I've been back and forth to China 20 plus times and watched go from 70 to 80% of their population living in poverty to about 0. Wow. And from 50 or 60% rural road penetration to 100%. And see how China's influence has grown and spread all over Asia and now around the world and in ways of infrastructure and programs as well. Now, we held with Ambassador Branstad and Ambassador Nick Burns, our current ambassador in Beijing, and Ambassador Qin Gang, the Chinese ambassador who's now foreign minister, in this room last April, U.S.-China agricultural dialogue. People piped in from China as well. And talking about two things. One was, how can we increase trade? And all the commodity group representatives were here. The head of the U.S. Grains Council flew in. The Soybean Export Council flew in to be here. Craig Floss and the corn growers announced that they just sold $750 million of corn to China. So trade is a big deal for Iowa, for the American heartland. Mm-hmm. The second thing I talked about was, I was the moderator and co-organizer, was how, in my view, the world, our planet, our species, faces the single greatest challenge it has ever confronted, which is, can we sustainably produce enough nutritious food to feed the 9.5 to 10 billion people who will be on our planet in 2046 when Iowa celebrates its 200th anniversary of statehood? Because it's not clear now that we can produce that much food. It will take great innovation, the kind of scientific research and breakthrough. We had a 200 Corteva plant scientists here yesterday on a tour, and I said that to them, that it's your work is going to decide, and that in other seed companies, whether we can produce that much food. But what's absolutely certain is that if there's not peace in the world, that we're not going to be able to meet that challenge, and these millions, if not billions, of hungry people won't sit still. They will move to wherever they believe food is, across great bodies of water and across land, whatever, to try to get to those places. And our planet will face this chaotic situation. We saw what happened with the Russian cruel invasion of Ukraine on that. Imagine a conflict between America and China. And what will happen as a result of that, and what will happen to this absolute essential need to meet this global food security challenge. And so what I write about, I talk about it when I Zoom in China. I talked about it when I went to China in 2018 and 2019, is that China and America should find a way, while we compete, absolutely, to collaborate in uplifting Africa. Because Africa is going to have another 1 billion people to feed between now and 2045 or 2050. And if you can imagine, Chinese with, just as you said, Congresswoman, these infrastructure issues, and America doing that, and taking the poorest countries in Africa and working with people like Akinwumi Adesina, the 2017 World Food Prize laureate, head of the African Development Bank, and building those roads and to market, and taking those new seeds that are going to be developed and doing it together. Could we, in a collaboration like that, which could grow out of the Iowa tradition and Governor Branstad and citizen diplomacy effort that brought Xi Jinping here to our state, and whatever issues may have with how the Chinese Communist Party rules China, is there a way in that history, in that legacy of how Governor Branstad, citizen diplomacy, from Muscatine and others did that, is there a way we could find a way to build that peaceful and maintain that peace and collaboration and avoid, hopefully, while people in Taiwan can stay with their sets of freedoms and democracy and keep all of this in place?
Well, I'm going to stay in that region for a moment, and nothing is simple. So on that note, and I think you are making a strong case for why the diplomatic approach is going to be so important there. But I want to talk about Taiwan. And Congressman Feenstra, you're on Ways and Means Committee, so you have jurisdiction over trade and tariffs. And we're increasingly seeing the sort of the Chinese coercive practices and rhetoric towards Taiwan. But what I hadn't realized is Taiwan is actually Iowa's 12th largest, the largest exporter of your agricultural products. So, how do we deal with that, right? You're on the Ways and Means Committee. We recognize where China is in the world. But how do we, for our own interests, both in Iowa and outside of that, how can we increase, the relations we have in the Indo-Pacific region to, frankly, benefit our own farmers?
Well, it's all relational. And from the administration to Ways and Means, we're just looking at right now of doing trade talks and going over there and talking with Taiwan and talking to other Pacific Rim countries of saying, all right, what can we do, whether it be a unilateral or bilateral trade deals. We have this great opportunity. It's unfortunate what has happened with China. We had phase 1 trade deal that was phenomenal. We went on to phase 2, it just really never happened. And China's buying their product. They're buying it from Brazil and other countries. So we have to re-engage. And currently, in the U.S., we have about $1 trillion trade deficit, largely through agriculture. So with China right now, China is importing to the U.S. about $543 billion a year. We're exporting to them $131 billion. So we have a significant trade deficit just with China. So that has to be talked about. And obviously, they get sideways with us when we start talking to Taiwan. But we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do both of these things. And that's what we're trying to do as a Ways and Means Committee, is trying to advocate and now set up these negotiations and deals as we move forward, along with the administration and Kathleen Tai being part of it.
Sure. One last question before we open it up to audience questions. I could go on all day. I'm sorry, I will let that microphone go around. But Congresswoman Miller-Meeks, this year is symbolic in the health field. In 2003, President George W. Bush launched PEPFAR. Most of you know PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And I think we can all admit, it has exceeded world expectations of really taking HIV/AIDS from a death sentence, if you will, now to seeing 25 million lives that have been saved. We also are, recently coming out of a global pandemic, right? And so I think health preparedness is on a lot of our minds. And as a doctor yourself, I wanted to ask you a little bit about America's global health program. So not only PEPFAR, but why are these investments in global health security so important, specifically to us here at home?
Well, I'm going to say first and foremost, it's that bacteria, viruses they don't respect borders. So there is no respect for a border. Representative Feenstra mentioned African swine fever.
Sure.
So you can, wherever you travel, you'll see that we're working with, immigration customs around the world to make sure they're checking anything that's going in and out, and then we're checking in our country so we don't get things like avian bird flu or African swine fever. But that also, humans, they're very mobile. And as we know from what started in, Wuhan province 3 years ago became a global pandemic that has killed millions of people, including over 1 million in the United States. So I think, and AIDS was one of those. It was a disease that may have started in one place, rapidly emerged around the globe. And I think it was very insightful what President Bush had done in PEPFAR and in treating in Africa. So having access to antiviral drugs in the African continent, hugely important. We could have done the same thing. We had this conversation with President Biden waiving patent protections. I don't think we waived patent protections, but we certainly could have produced and distributed vaccines. And then I'm going to tout a college not in my district, but at Iowa State University, what they're doing in the nanotechnology lab and what they're doing with nanotechnology and vaccines. And so, had we gotten this approved and through fast enough, they had the development to do it not with injections. So think about, you don't need the public health staff, you don't need trained individuals. It didn't need to be refrigerated, and it will be, I think, the future of how we dispense things. Think of those organizations that are not only public organizations, Rotary International, that does polio vaccines. So it's critically important, one, to protect the health not only of us in the United States, but the health of those other countries and communities. Malta 3 years ago had an outbreak of measles. Why? Because only 57% of the population had been vaccinated against measles. And we forget, in public health, we call it the crisis of our success. We've been successful at preventing childhood diseases. We don't see people die from measles or paralyzed from polio. I certainly grew up with people that had suffered, people that were blind from German measles. So we don't see that, and we become too cavalier about what we've been able to prevent. So our leadership in global health, working within the World Health Organization and other entities, I think is very important, because ultimately there is no respect for boundaries when it comes to, germs. And so it protects those countries, protects us, and then allows them to do the things that they need for their own survival. And I think is one of those things that is a soft diplomacy, if you will,
Sure.
but very definitely helpful.
Well, I think that's such a stark reminder, right? Not to, have our own success, hold us back, and something that has gone away and we don't think about, right, could come back. Okay, so my colleague, I think, there we go, Zane, has got a microphone. So, Zane, do you have some questions from the audience? Oh, yes, sorry. If you have a question, please do raise your hand so Zane can see you.
Thank you. Thanks, Zane. Tiffany O'Donnell, and I am the proud mayor of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which happens to be the largest corn processing city in the world. And gratefully, yes, thank you. And we're applauding Cargill because Cargill is one of our wonderful community partners in Cedar Rapids. My question is for Ambassador Quinn as it relates to the World Food Prize. One of the things that we get to see as mayors, we are on the front lines, particularly of note before I even came here, inside schools. And it seems our kids have really taken on hunger as a challenge. And I point to the pandemic when our schools were closed and we were clamoring for them to be open, not because we needed to learn, but because that was how so many of our students got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That really, I think, brought this issue home on a local level. Our youth have wrapped themselves around this issue. And one of the things that's most impressive from afar at the World Food Prize is how, Ambassador Quinn, you've been able to engage hundreds of youth in this global challenge. How is engaging our youth in this crisis make America's work more impactful and even more innovative?
Well, thank you. I didn't plant that question. Yeah, thank you, Mayor, on that. So, coming back home to Iowa in 1999, take over the World Food Prize. And think about there are hungry people in Iowa, food insecure people. Probably for a lot of us, we don't drive through those parts of our towns or cities, don't see it so much, but when you start looking. So in 2006, I went to then still Governor Vilsack, and then to Governor Ray, with whom I worked for 4 years, and we did Iowa Shares together, and with Governor Branstad, and said, we need to have some way of bringing focus on this, and I have an idea for something called the Iowa Hunger Summit. And, but I can write an op-ed and people aren't going to pay much attention to me, but if the three of you were to do that, and so in an election year, in October, a month before the election, these three governors and former governors signed and published an op-ed saying we'll be the honorary founding co-chairs of the Iowa Hunger Summit. And then Governor Culver, the next year at the first one, came with a proclamation, and there's this picture of the four of them around Norman Borlaug. And if there ever was an iconic moment of bipartisan inspiration around our state's greatest hero, that was it. We also had a youth program for high school students. When I came, it had 25 students who met for one day, all from Iowa. When I retired, we were touching 10,000 students in 30 U.S. states, 10 foreign countries, and we had at Iowa State, an Iowa Youth Institute, reached into 70% of Iowa high schools. But what you find is that compelling issue that, frankly, I think touches all of us. Because Iowa Shares, which was to rush food to starving Cambodians, was launched on the day before Thanksgiving. And by Christmas Day, we had $300,000 all from individual Iowans, and we rushed food that arrived on Christmas Day to these people who were dying 50, 100 a day of the effects of genocide. And so young students in high school, whether they have an ag background or not, they take this in their hearts. And they want to build on that, and they want to change the world. I say, if you want to change the world, go to Iowa State. I should say also go to Dordt or Loras.
University of Iowa.
University of Iowa, where the doctors saved my sight. I thought I was going to go blind, and the doctors in your specialty saved my sight. But go to the College of Ag, because that's where you can change the world. So I don't know, is Nora Tobin here? I saw her name on the guest list, or Crystal Harris, or any of them. So if they're not here, give them a black mark.
Okay.
On the advisory committee. But
that's Zane's job.
Yeah, but they, are two students who are now young adults, and who are making a difference, devoted their lives to this effort. So, thank you for that. It's one of the things that always brings Iowans together. State legislators, Democrats, Republicans, around Dr. Borlaug and fighting hunger.
Great. Time for a few more questions. If you can raise your hands, Zane will get around to you. Oh, I apologize. We've got one here already.
Hi, Bernie Stone, Veterans for Smart Power and member of the Iowa Committee, Advisory Committee. Turning to security as a veteran, and specifically for Representative Feenstra, we see a rise in authoritarianism around the world, a march or regression away from democracy, and specifically regarding Ukraine. How has America and our response and the things that we're doing with Ukraine increase future security for both the United States and our allies, and better secure the United States here at home?
Well, first of all, it's just amazing to see what has happened in Ukraine. It's just devastating. And to see companies like Cargill, Dr. Daniel Midland, John Deere, they all had massive footprints in Ukraine. And now, obviously, that's all gone. And talking to Ukrainians, that they can't even get their crop out, they can't get planting after the winter that's happened. It's quite tragic. But what the U.S. is doing is saying, hey, we want to make sure you win. I mean, we have to make sure that Putin and Russia loses. I mean, this is paramount. We believe in freedom, and we've done that through decades and generations, from World War I to World War II. We're in that same situation now, is that we are protecting freedom around the world. And we're doing that by giving them military capabilities and helping them with the war, to fight the war. But the bottom line is this, all right? We have devastated Russia's army, depleted it. All right? We haven't had one drop of blood of U.S. soldiers spilled in Ukraine. And we have to continue down this path of fighting, because freedom is at stake, right? If they take Ukraine, we know what's next. China's looking at this too, saying, you know what, if something happens, Taiwan might not be that strong. And here we got these countries that just are infancy in freedom, all right? We've had over 200 and some years of freedom, all right? These other countries are just starting, and we have to embrace it, and we have to make sure that freedom pervades this country, this world, instead of communism. I mean, we have freedom of speech. You ask those in North Korea, Russia, China, you know, what does freedom of speech look like? It means getting thrown in jail if you go against that government. So we have to do everything possible to make sure we win.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Over here.
Ken Chesky. I'm with the Council for Agriculture, Science, and Technology in Ames. A question for Congressman Feenstra, but would appreciate hearing maybe from the other panels. Since you serve on the Ag Committee, we're getting ready to work on a farm bill. There's a couple of places in the farm bill I think directly impact the discussion today. One is the work of the Foreign Agriculture Service and the work that they do in helping develop markets for U.S. farmers and look to ways that. I think the other one is the research title. You know, what's being done in our universities, more importantly, empowering our universities to work with their counterparts in developing countries to help increase their capacity. You know, one of the things, the institutions we take for granted here in the United States is our Agriculture Extension Service, which in the 30s and 40s was a great disseminator of agriculture, science, and technology. In a lot of these countries, you know, the role that U.S. could play that would be most beneficial would be allowing our scientists, our folks from the U.S., our extension professionals even helping those countries develop that capacity to diffuse information. It's great to have it in a university, but back to what Dr. Borlaug said, if you can't take it to the farmer, what good is it? And how do we make sure that science, that technology that's developed in universities in a lot of these developing countries makes it out in the countryside to help serve those farmers and build their capacity to work with better science to raise better crops and help achieve food security?
Well, you hit it on the head. It's collaborative. And what's happening with the research, whether it be at Iowa State or any of our universities, is just amazing. We're at the cutting edge of so many things when it comes to biotech, when it comes to protecting, whether it be avian bird flu to African swine fever, and then also genetics. Genetics coming to create GMO corn and that we can have better hybrids. That was a difference maker for our country this past year when we had a massive drought come through, and yet we were still getting 150 bushels an acre corn. It's just amazing what has happened because of research. So in the Farm Bill, we have the research title, and we have to make sure that we're funding that research title in the right way, that we can continue this research. And if you look at the Farm Progress Show, when you go to the Farm Progress Show, you see precision farming, you see what's happening to create value added. You see it in conservation about doing cover crops and doing no-till. We have learned that all through research. So we can be great actors in our environment through the research that's happening, and we can continue to feed the world like Norman Borlaug showed us through the new research techniques that are happening. So I'm very passionate about this issue, about how we can continue to increase research dollars and help our universities, and they can then bring it through and make sure our producers understand how important it is. And we do that through the Iowa State Extension, where it started in my hometown, Hull, Iowa.
If I could add to that, and I think it goes beyond the Farm Bill and what the government can do, and that is what the private sector does, and then also what the military has done. And so as we've been in countries in the military, since we had a veteran speak just before, part of that has also been resources, education, mentoring for both agriculture and infrastructure, and then what has happened in the private sector as well too. And it's not just that they want to go there and establish a facility, it's actually helping to train the agricultural knowledge that are needed. And then I would say, and what we've done in the private and working with our institutions of higher education, and I'm just going to mention biochar again, because I've got a bill for a biochar institute, hoping that it's established in Iowa. But it's a product that you'll mention it to people, and the people that know it, so not only does it sequester carbon, but helps with marginal soil, helps with drought-resistant water quality, improving water quality. I feel like I'm talking for the Farm Bureau here, and I'm not being paid to say this. So it's an energy thing. It sequesters carbon, can be done by pyrolysis. But my point is that we don't think about these things that are being done in the private sector and how they translate into agricultural diplomacy, because they can help, as we talked about in Africa, as you talked about, or in South America, places where they have marginal soils, and what you can do in a sandy soil and a clay soil, and how we can help to increase the agricultural yield in those things, in addition to what we're doing with crop modification and seed development.
Can I add one?
Close us out.
So I was Congresswoman, I'm, as you spoke, I'm absolutely all there, the research. I think if Dr. Borlaug were here, he might say, and I certainly would say for myself, that I'm afraid that we're not putting enough money from all sources, public and private, state and federal, into agricultural research. Because one of the great things of pride of America is that for more than 100 years, we have been the leader of agricultural research and education and production. No one close to rivaling us. And we built the single best agricultural research system in all human history in the land-grant institutions. Oh. But that leadership is at risk, because whatever you think about China, China is pouring resources and people into agricultural research, plus lots of others, areas, space research, and that American leadership could be, I pray not, I pray we will meet this, but could be overtaken and with achievements. And that would be tragic, and I know to Dr. Borlaug.
Well, on that, as we close out, and I think these have been powerful reminders as we go forward to stay engaged on these issues, I want to ask each of you just a closing, sort of lightning round of questions. And as I, opened today, I said at USGLC, we've spent the last 2 years really looking into both the quantitative as well as the qualitative data on, what is this worth? What is America's global leadership really worth, to Americans, to Iowans? And so I want to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with you, Sydney, and I recognize sometimes it's in brevity that it's the most poignant. So if I asked you, and I'm putting you on the spot, and trust me, brevity is not my strong point, but in your own words, what is it worth, to Iowa for America to lead globally?
Sure. So Cargill started in Iowa 157 years ago. Our very first operation was a grain warehouse in Iowa. And we've grown over 157 years to become a global partner. We're now doing operations in over 70 countries in 67 languages, I think is the latest. Wow. And that's probably changing as we speak. And so, our business depends on open trade and free markets, and diplomacy is what creates that, right? So, and Cargill, so just from those generations of experience, we've developed deep expertise and a long-term view of food and agriculture, and we have the vision to do the right thing, not just today, but for generations to come, right? And so, we think supporting sustainable development is also not just the right thing to do, but it's in the best interest, really, of Iowa, of the U.S. and the heartland here, and will help American industry for a number of reasons. But by helping developing nations and lifting, developing and underdeveloped nations out of poverty, we're improving people's lives, but we're also building new markets for U.S. products. And I think you mentioned some of these stats maybe, but 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the U.S. And the USDA projects that developing countries are going to account for more than 80% of the increase in global demand for meat, grains, and oilseeds over the next several years, which we produce all those things right here in the heartland. So we're going to, our farmers, this is going to be a challenge for us, but it's a great opportunity for us to increase profitability and to really open up new markets for our products here in the U.S. We think, to answer some of the questions, I think that collaboration between public and private sector is critical. Like I said, we're already present in 70 plus countries. So we can share, we have a great position as a private sector company to share technology and to share the innovation that we've learned across our businesses around the world with underdeveloped or developing nations and areas, so that we can share those ag practices that have been developed here in the United States with countries that have the potential but not yet the knowledge. And I just wanted to touch on one other thing. Cargill's had a long history of investing in our communities as well. And you talked about this as well a little bit earlier, but just in the last year, we've put $163 million of charitable contributions back into our communities. And again, one of our core values is nourishing and feeding the world. So we do this locally. Like my team in Fort Dodge is volunteering in our food pantries. We have a Meals on Wheels route, so I do go to those areas of our town that have a real need. I actually drove our route took one of the days last week with one of my teammates. So we're doing that in every community we're part of. So addressing hunger locally and globally is one of our key priorities. Not just priorities, really, it's a value for us.
Congresswoman, what's it worth to your district?
I'm going to speak not what it's worth to my district or to Iowa, but I think America's global leadership, hope for humanity.
Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Hear, hear.
Ambassador Quinn?
So I add one of the other great things that our country developed was the medical system, as reflected in all the medical schools, research, at our public and private universities and that. And, you know, when I left, became a diplomat, age 26, got on a plane for the first time in my life, with a passport for the first time in my life, and went off. I felt so good about my country. And I was inspired by the stories. You know, I was born right after World War II, of the incredible heroism and achievement that Americans from so many different backgrounds. You know, I used to be an Irish kid living in an Italian neighborhood in New York, in the Bronx. And if you, that'll make you tough. But how all people, all these different backgrounds were all amalgamated and brought together, and we became more than the sum of our parts. And we took, I believe, you know, civilization to this new level. And being abroad, and the sense of in a conflict, that you were doing this together, it was worth putting your life on the line for. And so now, if, you know, there's somehow questions in that, somehow we need to find inspiration. And the place I find the most possible inspiration to bring people together is around agriculture and around Norman Borlaug, and Herbert Hoover, George Washington Carver. We just had a day of recognition for, thank you, members of the legislature are here for doing that. And Jessie Fields Shambaugh, the woman who started 4-H, and Henry Wallace. And our state has kind of this unique place in this, to me. Bigger than our size and the number of people we have, but this incredible legacy. And so that's why I'm so enthused and so pleased Ambassador Branstad's going to come to the World Food Prize. So pleased I worked with Secretary Vilsack. And the only thing about, so I told Sydney before, I have very high regard for Cargill, their outgoing CEO, Don McLennan, and everybody called DMAC. But I have to say, you heard, started in Iowa. Norman Borlaug was born in Iowa, and somehow they both ended up in Minnesota. And, you know, so I think Minnesota has sort of stolen some of our heroes from us and to get back. But I say
we
it.
have a lot more operations in Iowa than we do in
Yes.
Minnesota.
Okay. Oh, well.
Just the headquarters.
Good.
Congressman Feenstra, what about you? What's it worth?
Well, I would just say when agriculture and our producers are successful, our hospitals are successful in our small towns, our schools are successful, our main streets are successful. Everything revolves in Iowa, our economy revolves around agriculture. And when we are the breadbasket to the world, we not only help Iowans, but we help the rest of the world. And that's what the amazing thing is about all this.
It's great. I don't know. I'm doubly proud to be an Iowan right now, I have to tell you. With that, we're about to close out our program. I want to invite Zane Franciscato, our Director of Central Outreach, to join us here on the stage.
Thanks, Michelle, and everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. One thing you should know about me is I am a Nebraskan. So please don't hold that against me. Thank you, Pat. But I have to say, I've been to Iowa more in my central region here than any of my other states. And everyone's so kind and nice, and you know, I'm really coming around to loving Iowa. So please don't let my neighbors in Nebraska know that.
You're from Nebraska too, right?
I know.
Yeah.
It's great to look around the room today and see some familiar faces and see a lot of new faces. And again, thank you so much for coming to this conversation today. Ambassador Quinn, Representative Feenstra, and Miller-Meeks, and Sydney, thank you for your insightful conversation today in showcasing why international issues like the ones we discussed today matter to Iowans. When Congressman Feenstra and Miller-Meeks and other members of the Iowa congressional delegation support America's development and diplomacy programs, We encourage, members of our advisory committee and members at large to, send a thank you letter to their congressional offices, highlight it in your local newspaper, call it into a local radio station, and even share it with your family and friends. If we can continue the conversation like the one we had here today, that's when we raise awareness towards these issues. Your continued engagement to show why America's global leadership matters to Iowa is crucial. On that note, I encourage everyone to stay in touch with USGLC and activities. As you all are very aware, Iowa is very important in the presidential elections, and so we're going to be here a lot. And we want you to continue coming to our events and continuing showing your support to these issues. Lastly, if you're interested in learning more about Farmers for Prosperity, the program Michelle mentioned earlier, Ashley Eason, Ashley's in the back of the room there. Speak to her about it. She's the one standing up that program, and she'd love to engage with you and connect with you about that. Again, thank you all for your support today, your passion, and your voice. Because of folks like you across the country, America remains the leading force of good in this world. Thank you.
Hear, hear.